Gavin, the next deputation, I believe, is a video presentation.
Yes, thank you, Lord Provost. Yes, the next deputation in relation to items 8.2 and 8.4, and it's from the Lothian Deprivation Interest Group, is a video presentation, and Jamie is going to share his screen so that everyone can view it.
Hello, my name's Laura McWhirter. I'm a psychiatrist in Edinburgh, and I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but I just wanted to introduce and highlight some of the key points from this letter, which my colleagues and I have written because we have been concerned to hear about possible plans for removal of some of the active travel infrastructure that was introduced to Edinburgh during the pandemic. We want to ask the Council to retain and in fact to improve and extend these active travel routes in the interests of public health. So most of my patients can't drive, whether that's because they don't have the financial means or because of illness or neurological disability. And I also sometimes have to talk to people about stopping driving, and that's really difficult. It can feel like a real loss of independence. And I think we've come to accept it almost as if it's the natural way of things, that as you get older, if you fall ill, if you become disabled, that you can't get around anymore. But actually that isn't fair, it's not right. You shouldn't need to drive a car to do normal day-to-day things. And car dependence doesn't only disadvantage those who can't drive, it also harms our health. And it doesn't harm all of our health equally. It causes the most harm to those who are most vulnerable, whether as a result of illness, disability or deprivation. I just want to make 4 points from the letter. So first, people living in areas of deprivation are less likely to drive, but much more likely to be injured in a road traffic collision. And that risk is particularly high for children and older adults over 70, who are more likely to be killed or seriously injured as a pedestrian. Second, in Scotland, traffic is the dominant source of air pollution. And if we extrapolate from the air pollution premature death figures in the Royal College of Physicians and Royal College of Paediatrics report published earlier this year, that suggests that air pollution contributes to about 300 premature deaths every year in the City of Edinburgh Council area. Third, a lot of us don't get the bare minimum of physical activity that we need to stay healthy, and about 1/3 of us are obese, but that of course level goes up in areas of deprivation, including in children and young people. But at the same time, less than 50% of our journeys under 2 miles are made on foot. And finally, the environmental and economic consequences of climate change are going to have the greatest harmful impact on the poor, the young, the elderly, and people with chronic ill health and disabilities. So reducing motor vehicle traffic, it won't only help to mitigate climate change, but it should also create a healthier city that's more resilient to the economic and environmental challenges that might lie ahead. I think with the active travel infrastructure that was introduced to Edinburgh during the pandemic, we got a glimpse of a potential different future. We saw all sorts of our patients and families start getting around by walking, wheeling, scooting, cycling. And indeed, many of us in healthcare have benefited from these routes and getting ourselves to work during what's really been a very challenging 18 months. Now, we appreciate how difficult it can be for people to change behaviours and to make new, different choices. And we know that that's difficult for you in the council as well, and there have been teething problems. I mean, we're not city planners or engineers, and these technical difficulties are for you to negotiate. But by removing this infrastructure, we really think that that would be a backward step. And we just want to gently remind you that when you make choices to prioritise private car travel, you choose also to differentially harm the most disadvantaged members of the city's population. So we call on the council to make a bold choice, make bold choices, and to retain and fortify these measures, and to extend and integrate them to make Edinburgh a safer, healthier and fairer place.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Dr. Susie Scarlett. I'm a GP based in northwest Edinburgh. I'm also primary care clinical lead for East of Scotland Partnership, who have been tasked with implementing the Healthier You framework for diabetes, type 2 diabetes remission and prevention. I'm coming to you from my morning commute. I'm lucky enough to walk on the quiet paths, and I'm just going into my area, which is one of the more deprived pockets of Edinburgh. I'm urging you this morning, as somebody who has a special interest in physical activity, to do what you can in order to encourage people of Edinburgh to make an active lifestyle part of their choice. I know that the patients in my area have got, for men, an 11-year life expectancy discrepancy compared to those in more affluent areas, and 8 years for women. We've got a disaster on our hands. Type 2 diabetes levels are exponentially increasing, not to mention the impending neurodegenerative disaster, public health disaster that we have on our hands. It needs a whole systems approach. Everybody can do their bit, and I urge you to do your bit this morning. I hope that you've managed to read the letter that we've all signed. I think it's been put together beautifully with some really wonderful points. So listen, please take note, do what you can, help us, because we're having to deal with the consequences of a sedentary population. So thank you very much for listening to me. Take care, bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Dr. Nora Murray-Kavanagh, GP Clinical Lead at Westerhales Medical Practice here in Edinburgh. I signed a letter in support of active travel in Edinburgh and really pushing to extend these measures, because I think cycling shouldn't be a privilege of the rich. During lockdown, we've seen obesity and mental health problems skyrocket across all age groups. I think normalising active travel, particularly cycling, but also walking, by making it a safe default option for people in all communities in our city, is really important. It's important for equity, it's important for financial security, it's important for health, both physical and mental. I think we can believe in better, and I really urge Edinburgh Council to both solidify and aspire to better for their active travel policies.
Thank you very much, Gavin. We'll move on to motion 8.2 now, and I would ask Councillor McInnes to move that motion, please.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. Well, we all received something of a clarion call directly into our inboxes. The open letter from councillors, two councillors from 144 medical experts and practitioners could not have been clearer in the ask they had for us, or in the reasons why that ask to retain and extend active travel infrastructure in the city is so important. They cite extensive respected research which underpins their key arguments that we have a collective responsibility to address the health inequalities that exist here in Edinburgh, that we have a collective responsibility to meet climate change demands, all in the interests of turning this city's face towards a greener, healthier, more equal future. So what are the health inequalities this august group of medics has highlighted? Deprivation runs historically deep in parts of our city and in individuals' lives, and it trails destruction in its wake. Premature death is 4 times higher in areas of most deprivation compared to those in the least deprived areas. Although less likely to drive, those experiencing most deprivation bear the impact of car use. They're more likely to be involved in a road traffic collision. Pedestrian casualties are twice as high as in adults. Children are more vulnerable, and pedestrians over the age of 70 have the highest fatality rates on the roads. They rightly call for investment in active travel and improvements in the urban environment, and highlight that many of the vulnerable in society cannot access private car transport. As mentioned before in committee and council, approximately 45% of Edinburgh citizens do not have access to a car. Over the last few decades, our cities, towns, villages and trunk roads have all changed beyond recognition. We have as a society sought and accepted higher car ownership, higher car use, and adapted our way of life and our physical environment to accommodate, in particular, private car ownership at an incredibly elevated rate. There are now 2.99 million vehicles registered in Scotland using 2018 figures. I presume it's gone up since then. In Edinburgh alone, in 2018, we had almost 200,000 vehicles registered. While car access has brought freedom for many, it's also undoubtedly brought restrictions for many too. The asthmatic child impacted by air pollution, the families too scared to let their children out to play or to cycle freely and independently as other European communities can do, the elderly too frightened to venture far from their front doors because of speed and levels of traffic, making for a hostile environment for them. What about the financial impact? on those families where money is tight, but where car ownership is seen as an unfortunate, draining necessity? What about those individuals and families who feel hampered in getting about by foot, by wheelchair or by bike, by the dangers of the road, of air pollution, or the general sense that the outdoor environment, the roads network, is not designed for them? There's a further clarity in the message that we've received from these many figures in the medical establishment who represent so many different aspects of modern medicine. They recognise that in facing into the problems caused by climate change, we have some of the solutions in our hands. Shifting from high car use to greater degrees of activity is vital. Shifting the emphasis towards building more safe infrastructure for walking, wheeling and cycling will allow more people to feel empowered to take those means of getting around to their hearts and to change from car dependency to healthier, more sustainable means of transport. These methods can be readily combined with increasing use of public transport. I note the similar directions of travel that we share with the Green Motion and now the proposed composite amendment, which I am of course willing to accept. Our motion requests that officers bring forward a report to the Transport and Environment Committee by March 2022, examining the issues that are raised in this letter, describing the likely effect of not making significant progress towards improved sustainable transport within Edinburgh and, importantly, its connections with neighbouring authorities, and outlines the transport-related actions that the Council is taking towards achieving that more equitable, healthier future for all those living, working and visiting in Edinburgh. We cannot ignore the impact of transport poverty on the lives of people who live in Edinburgh. Limited options to access, work, education and leisure. We need to open those up by the use of sustainable transport options inside the city. So let's be really clear. It's our responsibility as elected members to take difficult decisions, to take decisions that look to the future, that help to define our future as a city. It's my belief that this motion is essentially a no-brainer. We've heard the call from respected medical figures in this city, the very people who spend their valuable time and their education caring for the people of this city and mitigating health impacts, which can be changed in the future. It would reflect very well on us to listen to them very carefully. I recommend this motion to the Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McInnes. And to second the motion, Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I won't add too much to what Councillor McInnes has said, because I think this motion is incredibly important to the whole of the city, and I welcome the information that we've received through that. I will second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Doran. To move the Conservative amendment, Councillor Rust.
Thank you, Lord Provost. In moving the Conservative Group amendment, I want to be clear on two things. Firstly, we very much welcome all constructive engagement on the issue of active travel and transport measures in the city, be that for all medical professionals or community councils or other groups. Indeed, if there had been proper consultation at an earlier stage and a more transparent process, we may not be where we are now. Secondly, there is much in the specific letter in general terms with which my group would not disagree, and we share the common goals on active travel. There is, however, in our view, a disconnect between the content of the letter and the detail of individual schemes. As an NHS Lothian senior consultant who's a keen cyclist wrote to one of my colleagues, quote, "Even if you accept all the assertions of the quoted references, and even if you support the concept of properly conceived, constructed and maintained cycleways, as I do, there are some huge leaps made in reaching the conclusions in the letter. The Edinburgh scheme, as it stands, does nothing to reduce congestion or emissions and has not been shown to improve road user safety or air quality." End of quote. My group's serious concern, shared by residents, is about the process through which these schemes have been advanced by the Council and the flawed approach taken, as well as the installation of specific measures. We have concerns that the Council's own sustainable transport hierarchy has been disregarded. Where disabled people, patients, carers, public transport users are experiencing a negative impact, then we do not have a fully inclusive active travel programme in the city. And only today, the Vice Chair of the Edinburgh Access Panel said, quote, "Many people were dismayed by the apparent disregard shown by the medics for the safety and welfare of disabled people. It's hard to believe that those who signed their open letter supporting the measures were aware that more than 2/3 of the measures had been labelled by the Council themselves as having a negative impact on the disabled." End of quote. The scores and decisions to retain and remove schemes are buried in the middle of the June report to Transport Committee, which was referred to full council, between pages 44 and 48, and the scoring criteria to define these scores is on page 53 for public transport and page 59 for disabled users. The colour coding at a glance shows the negative impact on disabled people. And bear in mind, this is the council's own scoring, which was challenged at the time as thought too lenient, and an alternative set of more robust criteria was suggested, but as ever rejected. The baseline is that there is scarce evidence to show that the schemes are resulting in positive health outcomes. Indeed, there is limited monitoring of schemes for their effects on pollution, air quality and active travel journeys. And much of the criticism has been that the measures are in fact counterproductive and leading to increased congestion and pollution. It's far from clear what the criteria of success looks like. And if we want to be on a journey to net zero, the council requires to bring people with it. The council has not made anything like the case required, and there is a constant lack of data. And more months, 18 months, is nearly a fifth of the time left to implement effective solutions to achieve net zero. What is clear is that schemes have been perceived as unsafe and at times of questionable design, and that much of the pop-up infrastructure is simply not being used. There are many other valid points which are covered in the written deputation which was made this morning. And when we're thinking about health inequalities, let's not forget the wider context. If you have the resources, possibly helped by a tax break discount through the Cycle to Work scheme, to buy a smart, conventional or electric bike, have a secure garage or alternative storage facility, home insurance that includes cycle theft cover, a £60 cycle lock and a bike cage with well-constructed racks at your workplace, you're in quite a different situation from someone living in an upstairs flat in a socially deprived area of the city, with nowhere safe to park a bike at your home or outside your destination. And if you're not eligible to benefit from the cycle to work, as the consequent salary sacrifice would take you below minimum wage, nothing the council is currently doing addresses that. In moving the amendment, Lord Provost, I thank the 144 medics for the letter, welcome their inputs, and would recommend that if they haven't already done so, that they review the reports and have a conversation with the Access Panel and disability groups, many of whose members are their patients. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Rust. And to second the Conservative amendment, Councillor Hutchison.
Thanks very much, Lord Provost. I will be brief. I'll absolutely endorse all the comments of my colleague, Councillor Rust, who's comprehensively laid out why the Conservative group have brought forward this amendment. Councillor McInnes spoke in moving the coalition proposal about making difficult decisions. In my view, Lord Provost, what Councillor McInnes is doing and what the coalition are doing are making the decisions for the people of Edinburgh very easy when it comes to voting next year in a council election. The views of our citizens have been entirely disregarded by the arrogant and dismissive attitude of this administration throughout the Spaces for People programme. And as I say, I think that'll make the decision for people next May very easy when it comes to this administration. If you don't listen to the people who put us in this position, we are here to represent the views of our citizens, all our citizens. That is something that this administration have entirely failed to do when it comes to Spaces for People. As Councillor Rust says, even the council's own active travel hierarchy has been turned on its head. It's all about cycling, walkers, disabled people, wheelers, entirely disregarded, their views just cast aside again and again and again. Councillor McInnes and the administration say we're listening. When are we going to see any evidence that that's happening? I second the Conservative amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. To move the Green amendment, Councillor Miller.
Thanks, Lord Provost. Yeah, I'm very happy to move the Green amendment, which the eagle-eyed amongst us will see is basically a composite of my original motion at point 8.4 on the agenda and Councillor McInnes's motion, which we're currently on right now. And the only change really would be to have a deletion of the introductory preamble paragraph of my original motion, which was basically duplicated between the two of them. And I wanted to propose this amendment and withdraw my motion just to make the process a little bit easier for everybody, including yourself, Lord Provost. So although this is a bit of a clunky sort of thing to be doing, I'm really glad to be doing this this, because I really love it when there is a shared sentiment across groups in the council, and a clear sense of direction that we can share across political groups. And like Councillor McInnes, I was really impressed that a group of doctors had taken the time and put in the considerable amount of effort into composing such a thoughtful and clear letter to the council, taking time out to do that after their working day was done and going above and beyond to engage with the council as a trusted partner. Under normal circumstances, I'd say that anyway, but particularly under the circumstances that health workers have been under since March last year, it's indicative to me of how important they have deemed this subject. And I think that we owe them thanks for sharing with us their professional opinions and their recommendations. I feel that as trusted partners to us in the council, we should be taking that on board and not questioning their expertise. So today I'm speaking very briefly to propose that this council supports their analysis completely, that the health of the population in Edinburgh is our concern, that the council supports and responds to their calls for places where it's easy and safe to walk, wheel and cycle, and that we act on their call for an integrated view of the key challenges that they are quite rightly calling out that our city is facing: inequalities, health and well-being and the climate crisis. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Councillor Miller, and to second the Green Amendment, Councillor Corbett.
Thanks very much, Lord Provost, and I really can't add an awful lot to what Councillor Miller said. I think we've got a clear choice in front of us today. Do we take account of the views that were expressed in the letter and very powerfully in the video that we saw earlier on today, and do we move forward progressively in building what we've had, make it better, move faster, or do we delay, dilute, reduce and filibuster, which is the same choice that we've been put in front of us in each of these meetings? And I think that choice is very clear, so I'll be supporting the Green Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corbett. Contributions, Councillor Arthur.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I don't blame the Conservatives for invoking the spectre of spaces for people, but this motion's not really about spaces for people, though, is it? The letter, of course, was about asking for spaces for people schemes to be retained, which were going to be and are still going to be scrapped. So that point of the letter's not been addressed. It's really about the wider point about the health and well-being impacts of cycling and walking. And I think the point really made in the video was in how, in particular, people in more deprived communities can benefit from that. If I'm honest, when I first looked at the motion which came from the coalition, I thought it was very much about having a report written which patted the coalition on the back for doing a good job. But I think based on the deputation this morning, and I think also Councillor McInnes's reflection on that deputation, I can see that it really does take on board that point around how people in deprived communities can benefit most from investment in walking, cycling, and also, of course, public transport. So there's two particular dimensions I'm interested in. Firstly is pretty soon, hopefully, the Scottish Government will live up to its promise to give kids from poorer backgrounds a free bike. So I think as a council, we have a duty to think about how kids can make best use of those bikes, and in particular, how they can use them to get to and from school. I'm a big believer in starting good habits early in life. So there is a real opportunity there to build on that investment from the Scottish Government to make sure communities in Edinburgh benefit. And I think Councillor Russ raises a really good point. People in poorer communities are much less likely to have the space available to park their bike. So that might be something we want to think about in this report as well. I think the other issue I'd like to raise is also about the general routes to school. In my ward, both the police and the MOD Army Liaison Officer have raised concerns about the routes to one of my schools, Collington Primary School. The response which came from the council, after a few months, I have to say, said that the situation ought to be reviewed over the next 2 years, and after that there'll be a 5-year implementation plan to resolve the issue. So that means there's a possibility that none of the children at that primary school could benefit from the concerns which were raised by both the police and the Army Liaison Officer. So I would say that if this report is looking at health and well-being, if we are looking at deprived communities, really a big focus should be making sure that these kids with these free bikes can get to and from school, as well as all the other stuff we're doing around walking and public transport. So, as I said earlier, I was a bit cynical, but now I see this as a big opportunity actually to make sure we're doing the right thing and we're heading in the right direction. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Councillor Arthur. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I share much of what Councillor Arthur has expressed, but I welcome, like Councillor McInnes does, this letter, and like most of us, I'm sure the video really expressed and conveyed well, the issues we have with sedentary lifestyles and so forth. In particular, it highlighted the issues around communities and individuals who do not have access to bicycles or other forms of transport that more wealthy parts of Edinburgh and people in Edinburgh have. And I welcome that being aired, and it needs to be addressed, as Councillor Arthur says. The recently disbanded Helping Hands charity did a wonderful fundraising initiative that gave, I forget how many children across the city in areas that are, I hate using the word deprived, but areas where families don't have the means to perhaps buy new bikes for their children, provided a whole lot of children across the city with brand new bikes, helmets and safe instruction on cycling. And that made a huge difference to the lives of those young people. In terms of, yes, it's easy to sort of be critical of spaces for people and other active measures, but for goodness sake, we all rely and need transport, and we need to concentrate on working together to make things much better. It's been hugely challenging between COVID, between cuts in funding and so forth. One of the things I would like to make a call for is for the Scottish Government to give us more funding so that we can do more to make our roads and pavements much safer. I appreciate the amount of money we've spent on roads resurfacing and pavements, but that is an issue that comes up time and time again from people, well, pedestrians, cyclists, but also particularly people with mobility issues and prams and so forth. So it's not perfect. We've got a lot still to do, but we should not be so dismissive of a very important letter that's highlighting the plight of and the pressures on the health service as a result of people not being as active as they should be. And we need to do all we can as a council to preserve our green spaces and make sure that our green spaces and our roads and everything are as active and open for people to enjoy, particularly for those who have very limited means. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Lang.
Yep, thank you very much, Lord Provost. So, like others in other political groups, my Liberal Democrat colleagues and I were very pleased to see this contribution, not just in terms of the open letter, but in the deputation that we had earlier on today. I think over the last 4 years, we've maybe thought of active travel too much in the context of the important role it plays in terms of reducing emissions and tackling congestion, and not enough in thinking about the health benefits of it. And so I think the contribution that we've had has been really powerfully made and a really important contribution to the debate. And one of the words that's not been used so far that I think is important is balance. And the truth is that we as councillors have a difficult job to do in balancing different and, let's be honest, sometimes competing interests when it comes to transport. As some of the deputations have very effectively shown, what benefits one group, maybe a group of cyclists, can disadvantage other people in terms of disabled car users or public transport users. And so it's not always a clear-cut debate. There are shades of grey, and sometimes we have to make difficult, subjective decisions around what the right thing is to do. But that's why I do welcome all contributions to this debate, and have to say, unlike the prickliness that is too often shown by the administration, we simply welcome every contribution to this debate, whether we agree with it or not. Everyone has got the right to have their view listened to and responded to. Now, Lord Provost, I appreciate that Councillor Miller was trying her best to reduce the clunkiness, I think is what she described it, of the process for this particular debate. However, it's worth saying that whilst my Liberal Democrat colleagues and I, we were very comfortable and very supportive of Councillor Miller's motion, we weren't as comfortable with the Coalition's one. And we didn't think that an additional report was really desirable or necessary. We've got reports coming out of our ears on this, Lord Provost. We've got a city mobility plan. We've got a city plan coming up. We've got an active travel plan, a public transport plan, and we've got more reports coming on ETROs for the Space for People programme or the Travelling Safe, or whatever it's called now. There are plenty of opportunities coming up for the Transport Committee, and who knows, maybe for this council, to make decisions taking into account the very important contribution that we heard in the deputation and from the open letter. And the administration constantly complains about unnecessary reports which are being called for from opposition members.
The conclusion.
And so that's why, Lord Provost, with your permission, given the fact that a composite's been proposed, we would like to propose the original wording of Councillor Miller's motion as an alternative to what's being presented to the composite, because we're happy with Councillor Miller's original motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Lord Provost. It really was compelling, the video that we saw included the contribution of Dr. Nora Murray-Kavanagh from the West Highlands Medical Practice in the Penton Hills ward about the health inequalities that half the constituents in Penton Hills suffer. And I know no councillor would want to see that continue, and we must do all we can to address these issues. I've had regular dialogue with the transport convener. We've not always agreed on local ward matters, but I think it's important to engage. And I think it's also clear that the health professionals are saying bits of the schemes can be tweaked, but this motion is not about that. It's about the longer term consequences of lack of health, or the lack of opportunity to have a healthy lifestyle. And earlier, the deputation we heard earlier for me was really about whole system approach to healthcare. Whole system approach to healthcare starts right at the front of it. It's all about placemaking, having the right environment to get out and about. And the way that Western Hills was constructed in the 1960s and early 70s was with a bypass running through it, underpasses for people to get from one side to the other, and the real lack of infrastructure, which needs to and can be changed with the master plan process, which is underway. And I will try and engage with the doctor in my ward and hear her views. I think when we talked about the previous deputation, it was important for me to hear from experts and professionals. This is really hearing from them, and it adds to the debate. I'm a bit disappointed that the counter motion goes back to consultation and all that kind of stuff, because that may be important, but that's a different issue. I think this is a much bigger and long-term issue. We need to properly address it, and ultimately it will save the health service money we don't actually have much of, so we can put our resources in the right place if we address these fundamental issues now. So I hope that the report, and Leslie will speak about it later, I hope the report that she's asking for can address some of these longer term systemic health issues about active travel as much as the day-to-day, and I will continue to engage with her on the day-to-day stuff, but that's not for today, that's not for this motion. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Jim Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I rather agree with an earlier contribution that the Transport Committee has had many reports, and perhaps it doesn't need another report. It needs to focus on some solid action in the city, perhaps not just in active travel, but maybe in other things like waste and cleansing. However, I know that's not the topic under discussion. It was also mentioned we have a choice, and we do have a choice. We have a letter from 140 or so medics, and I welcome that, but we also have a whole city, and 560, 600,000 electors who also have a say in this. And I think as a council and as a committee, we have to be cognizant of what the citizens of the city want, not just what 140 medics want. And they seem to be saying pretty comprehensively they're not impressed with the lack of consultation they have had so far on this topic. And I think it's important we bear that in mind. I very much enjoyed the deputations today, but I am pretty sure if we replayed the tape, there was a segment where a doctor said that they were against cars. I'm not sure that's the role of a doctor. I think they can be against the pollution cars create, and they might argue that cars lead to a more sedentary lifestyle, and that would seem a perfectly appropriate thing. But I'm not sure why being against a car by itself is an appropriate statement for a medic. After all, one might imagine a car being produced that has zero emissions at all, and one might also imagine a car being produced in the future that is much less expensive and perhaps more available to people on limited means, and that might represent some opportunity as well as some challenge. Indeed, I think Tony Blair, in a report from his think tank recently, made exactly that point. So we do have a choice, and I think the other thing that's worth perhaps reflecting on is that we have much medical advice, not least perhaps that we should all stop smoking, but as a society we allow some people to continue smoking. We've not banned it, we may have discouraged it, we may place taxes on it, but people have still got that free choice. Free choice is an important thing to preserve, and many medics choose to drive cars to their work. You just have to look at the car parks at hospitals to confirm that point. And I would not support the removal of that choice. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. Absolutely welcome the contribution by the experts and in their field in terms of the health impacts on people in this city, all 520 odd thousand of them, if Councillor Campbell is looking for an accurate figure. Obviously far fewer electors, but that's another point. It's always worth listening to the experts because they know what they're talking about, because they're dealing with these things day in, day out. They can see the impact of respiratory issues on their patients, on people in our communities, on our constituents from air pollution within our city. They can see the impact of lack of activity of people in the amounts of health complications and diabetes and other things that they are dealing with day in, day out. These are our constituents as well as their patients, and we should listen to the experts. I am reminded, Lord Provost, that at the weekend I was through in the far west in Dunoon, and travelling up the A770. There was case of some spaces measures, and along the beautiful shore road with a gorgeous view of the water, and their solution to intermittent bus stops was to have the cycle lane essentially plough through it. And I can imagine the horror of faces had we designed our schemes in the same way. And I am reminded that Glasgow have come to a similar position in terms of longer term future for their schemes. Highlands have done the same. Every local authority is facing into this and dealing with, as Councillor Lang said, the difficult balancing act that this can be. But I think in terms of Edinburgh's approach of listening, of refining, of addressing issues, of removing schemes where appropriate, I think we are absolutely showing that we are listening. And I would point out that while there has been a consistency of regression in the way that Conservatives right across Scotland have approached this issue, there has been some varying degrees of ability to make sense of it amongst the Conservative members across the country. I would draw a last analogy, Lord Provost, between the 20 mile an hour rollout and this, where we did listen to experts, we did roll out 20 miles an hour, and then we had a definitive study from St Andrews University showing that fewer people were killed in Edinburgh on our roads because of that policy. I point out gently The Conservatives fought that policy every step of the way. I point out gently that the Evening News, our local paper, championed the opposition to that vigorously and loudly day in, day out. And the result, if we had listened to it, would have been more people dying in our roads. That is what the definitive academic survey from St Andrews University has shown. This is an economic equalities issue. This is a health equalities issue. And we owe it to our citizens, we owe it to our voters to listen to the experts and what they're telling us and listen to our constituents. And I agree with Councillor Hutchison. The track record of the Conservatives has been appalling the last 4 years, and the decision will be very easy for the voters of this city, just as it has been every election since I've become council leader, where the Conservative vote share has dropped like a stone.
Thank you, Councillor McVeigh. Councillor Webber.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Hopefully you can hear me fine. I just want to speak a little bit about us not wanting to question the expertise of the 144 medics that have contributed to the letter. And I suppose I'm also wanting to present something a little bit different in terms of other experts, in terms of how they are suggesting we might want to tackle some of the health inequalities that appear to be so important to the administration. We have to remember that if you're an SIMD 1 and 2, you only get 50 years of what's classed as good life. But if you're fortunate enough to be an SIMD 9 and 10, you get 70 years of good life. So what's really, really important to tackling health inequalities is helping our young people not die from suicide, not die from drug-related deaths, not die from alcohol-related deaths. That is the biggest single thing that we can do to tackle health inequalities. Everything else is scratching at the surface. One of the other things that we can do that is so key that we all seem to forget is that where we live, in terms of the fabric of our building, is a significant contributor to our health. So by providing good quality homes, something this council has failed to do, is another significant factor in tackling health inequalities. And let's finally reinforce what Councillor Jim Campbell said in terms of other public advice. I've got a quote here from Professor Chris Whitty, who says that lung cancer is almost entirely caused by greedy cigarette firms. He says smoking killed more than 90,000 people compared to the 80,000 people that died from COVID. What we have to do, though, we have that personal choice. Cigarette smoking is bad for us, but there are many people sitting in this chamber today, virtual chamber, that still choose to smoke. And finally, my concluding point, Lord Provost, is that I have been contacted, as have colleagues, by a number of those that are disabled and groups that represent disabled people. They are fearful of coming forward to have their voice heard in this continued binary, divisive debate. And again, they have been ignored today with this motion, which is why I'm supporting the amendment presented by Councillor Rust. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Webber. Just a quick intervention here. I'm conscious I've got 3 other people to speak. We are actually up against the 40-minute rule on this, so I'm only going to allow one more speaker and then go right of reply to Councillor McInnes. But before I ask Councillor Osler to speak, because I think it may have an impact on what she's going to say, I am going to allow the verbal proposal that Councillor Lang put forward. Obviously, it's only a proposal and it needs a seconder, which is why I'm saying it before Councillor Osler speaks. And I'm allowing that verbal intervention because what he's proposing was already on the order paper and written down, and people could see that and read it in advance. I wouldn't normally do that, but I think it's fair in this instance. So, Councillor Osler.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Provost, and thank you very much indeed for that intervention. Yes, I would like to second Councillor Lang's call to actually just ask for 8.4 to be reinstated. I don't think any of us are going to argue about the importance of active travel. I think that's something that as 63 councillors we all do agree on. And I do think it is absolutely phenomenally important. But I also do think that there is a huge amount of reports. There's an enormous amount of written information about this. What it is the problem, though, is action. We have a large number of active travel and various consultations that have been conducted that residents have taken part in that have never seen the light of day. 8-9 years down the line, they're still waiting for them to come forward. I would just question whether it's really necessary to have a report. We've all agreed today that this is phenomenally important. So if we've all agreed that this is phenomenally important, I would really question the necessity for this. I do honestly think that the Greens motion that they put forward is a very, very sensible one. It should be looked at, and we should take into consideration when matters are considered what has been said. And I do think that's the simplest way of doing this, and to pay, proper respect to what has been put forward to us today. I think that is the actual sort of right way of doing it, is to look at exactly what has been presented and to take that as a reflection, rather than producing another report when we already have so many that are already outstanding. Thank you. That is all I have to say. So with that, I will just second the request.
Thank you, Councillor Osler. Right of reply, Councillor McInnes.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. I want to thank everybody who's contributed to this debate. It's been very useful in my view. It's exposed a number of different opinions across this chamber. And I think it's also been very useful in exposing a fault line in this council, because there are those who believe that actual progress should be made, that we should listen to the asks of the medical representatives that we heard today and in the letter that they sent to us, and those who hide behind quibbling, criticism of implementation, the I wouldn't start from here position, all designed to delay progress and to retain the status quo, which favours, frankly, vehicular traffic, with all the exposure of large parts of our, at the expense of large parts of our community. While we've spent the last year arguing about aspects of implementation of new walking, wheeling and cycling infrastructure, I believe that some of us have lost sight of the reasons why we need to make the bold choices requested by the medical colleagues that were quoted today. They asked us to aspire to be better. And that is exactly what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to put in place infrastructure that allows people to make choices, to make better choices for them. And at the moment, there are severe limitations on people's possibility of travelling, for example, safely by bike with their children to school. There are limitations on people being able to wheel on pavements because of the width of some pavements, for example. There are limitations on all sorts of aspects of sustainable transport options in this city. And it's not about, as it's been presented by one or two of the contributors today to the debate, as being about the equivalent of smoking and being banned. Nobody's banning cars. There is no war on cars. There is no war on the motorist. What there is a desperate campaign to provide alternatives, to provide people with the kind of choices that they do not have now because of the volume of cars in this city. So it's about providing choice. There will always be those who have to use a car. And this administration recognises that really clearly. But what we also recognise is that we're failing the 45% of people who cannot get access to a car. So I do object really strongly to the notion that somehow we're trying to ban cars in terms of the allusion towards the same thing as a smoking ban. It's not about removing choice to use car. It's about providing more choice for people to take alternative methods. Simple as that. So it depends on how you value the people of this city. Do you value their opportunity, or do you want to limit their opportunity? That to me is a clear fault line. Councillor Webber made some interesting points about public health and the benefits that we can bring to particularly the young people in the city. And I would agree with her. There is an enormous amount of work to be done around mental health, around the reduction of suicide, about the improvement of living conditions. But that lies out with the scope of this particular motion. And quite frankly, it could be labelled as whataboutery. And the reason why I say that is that active travel is not designed to solve all problems in the city, but active travel can contribute to the solutions of problems in this city. And we shouldn't just disregard it, as seems to be the wont of some arguments here, and say we should only concentrate on certain items. It's not an argument that bears any degree of scrutiny. It's been really disappointing to see the tone and the limitations of the Tory amendment and the debate contributions that have come forward. It seems to me that it has no vision, it has no acceptance of the fact that we need to take a different direction in this city, as asked for by the medical establishment that has been represented here today. a really serious disappointment. I really had hoped when we brought forward this motion, and then we subsequently looked at the composite motion with the Greens, that we could have found acceptance for that across the City Chamber. What is there in there to object to? And instead of which, what we got back was an amendment and contributions to the debate that have never risen above the extremely localised opposition that actually sits in opposition to their own UK party position about expansion of active travel, about investment in that as a real possibility. Instead of which, what we've seen is a continuation of what we've seen at Transport and Environment Committee, which is obscure, obfuscate, delay, dither.
To conclusion.
That doesn't serve the residents of this society at all. I do just want to make it really clear. The report that we are asking for to come forward is a very useful marker. It is not an end result in itself, but it will be a response directly to the medics and to the asks that they have. I commend this motion to the committee, and I would suggest, therefore, that we would not be supporting Councillor Lang's suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McInnes. Gavin, to the vote, please.
Thank you, Lord Provost. So that brings us, we are at item 8.2. This is a motion by Councillor McInnes, seconded by Councillor Doran, which also accepts the Green amendment. On this, we have a Conservative amendment moved by Councillor Rust, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, which is also circulated, and we have a Liberal Democrat amendment moved by Councillor Lang, seconded by Councillor Osler, which moves the original motion that was outlined in 8.4 by Councillor Miller on the agenda. So what we have then, as I said, motion by Councillor McInnes, Conservative amendment and Liberal Democrat amendment. And as before, we'll go to an electronic vote. I'll launch the vote and we'll have 1 minute to vote.
Gavin? Having trouble voting. Sorry, it's not coming up on my screen this time.
Have you looked in the chat function, the conversation function, because you can usually vote via that, but if not, we can take your vote at the end.
Okay, it's come up now. Thanks. Thank you.
Brilliant. I will then close the poll and just do the check to see if there's anybody who couldn't vote electronically. I'm not seeing anyone. We got 55 votes then, 33 votes for the motion by Councillor McInnes, 16 votes for the Conservative amendment and 6 votes for the Liberal Democrat amendment. The motion is carried.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gavin. I think that's an appropriate time to have lunch now. Propose that we have a break. It's 15 minutes past 1. We'll come back at 1:50. 1:50. Thank you.